This video is brought to you by Exeter. Alright, hear me out. I know that title's got a lot of you riled up, so let me clarify. Secret Invasion was largely a failure. We went over some of that in the last video. It disappointed me quite a bit, and I agree with a good deal of the criticisms that have flown around since it wrapped up, but not all of them. I think a common issue people seem to have had with Gravik, the show's villain, is a bit off base, so in this video I'm going to argue for 2 points. The first being that a lot of people are wrong about Gravik, the second that he does kind of work. First, that common issue. The accusation is simple, and I'm sure many of you have seen it somewhere before. Gravik got done dirty by the writers. He's simply the latest in a long line of Marvel villains with well-founded, often seemingly progressive social or political critiques, to suffer a mid-story character assassination, to suddenly act unreasonable, to go too far, and that this was a cop-out by the writers to avoid handling that point. In short, they Carly Morgenthau'd Gravik.
Why should we?
This is, as far as I can tell, not a straw man. I've seen that sentiment with minor variations on YouTube, Reddit, Discord, and as you're now seeing, in article form on websites. It's been a common response to Secret Invasion. It's also, I think, wrong. Let's be clear, what isn't wrong is the idea that there is a pattern like this that exists, and that we've seen it a good deal in the MCU, especially since Phase 3. I've spoken about it before, as have many creators in this space, so if you don't need a refresher, skip to the time on screen now, but if you do need one, here's a summary. We'll be focusing on the evasion of valid critiques in 3 of the major examples: Hela, Killmonger, and the Flag Smashers. Although, yes, you could bring a good few more into this discussion. Namor's opposition to neocolonial structures, the Vulture's partial class consciousness, and so on. But basically, it looks like this. Our hero is unaware of or unsympathetic to a problem in the world, likely a social problem specifically, but then the villain shows up. The villain is often a dark reflection of our hero, and has an issue with them. The villain's trying to solve that problem, and sees the hero as just another arm of an indifferent establishment, not bothered about the cause. If they're not with them, the villain says, they're against them. Fisticuffs ensue. There's always 2 related wrinkles here. First, the villain kinda has a point. Asgard's power was built on imperialism. Millions of African and African-descended people the world over are still suffering from centuries of discrimination, colonialism, and neocolonialism. The borderless mutual aid of the blip was a better direction for the future of humanity than the snapped back to familiar competitive nationalistic geopolitic which followed, and the countless displaced peoples were absolutely thrown to the wolves in the name of a return to some distant status quo, and so on. Second, the villain always takes things too far, always misses their own valid point. Hela reveals the unjust foundations of the Asgardian throne, but she couldn't have cared less about redressing that injustice. She just wanted to be the beneficiary herself. Killmonger was, of course, right that the greediness of imperialists, of imperialism, and the brutal, discriminatory hierarchies those propped up and were propped up by had led to enduringly unequal conditions and cycles of violence across the world. But similar to Hela, instead of trying to dismantle, move beyond those systems, Killmonger tries to flip the balance.
The sun will never set on the Wakandan Empire.
And Carly Morgenthau, of course, blows up a building full of people for no reason. The hero is alerted to both of these wrinkles in quick succession. They learn of the villain's point, and they learn how far the villain's gone, or is willing to go. The hero tries to cool things down, maybe they even offer an olive branch, but the offer is rejected, and so, sadly, the hero must fight to support the status quo, must defeat the misled radical. But after their enemy is defeated, the misty-eyed hero pledges to take up that point and pursue it in the right way. Thor destroys the old imperial polis and creates a new social contract, which very conveniently proclaims him king. His position effectively remains unchanged. T'Challa opens Wakanda to the world and establishes outreach programs to aid the African diaspora, but we never see anything to indicate anything substantial changes as a result. Captain America defends the GRC and gives them a speech, reframing the world's problems from systemic to individual. One can imagine the Flag Smashers spinning in their graves. Performative gestures or superficial shifts count as doing things the right way, and since this change happens at the story's end, even those gestures and shifts are left off screen. We see a start with the promise of more to come, but then the film ends. This dynamic allows movies or shows to conclude with a semblance of justice, and allows the world to continue fundamentally unchanged in the next movie, and so on. This general template isn't exactly unique to the MCU, but yes, it is fairly common within it. And all that being said, I really don't think Gravik belongs in this discussion. He's no Carly Morgenthau or Namor, who start out fighting for a just cause but lose their own justness in that fighting. He's no Hela, Killmonger, or Vulture, who use a valid critique as the casus belli for selfish action. The only valid point to Gravik's cause is the idea that Skrulls deserve a place to live, and that's not a critique like the above, that's a position shared by practically every character, especially at the show's beginning. This is not some hard truth the powers that be can't accept, that must be diluted down for the hero to eventually superficially support. And this point is only valid when presented like this, in a partial, toned-down form. Put more precisely, Gravik doesn't want a place for Skrulls to live, he wants a place just for Skrulls, a place to own. Yes, his grievance against Fury is valid. Yes, Fury had been exploiting them, but only really since he'd seemingly abandoned any hope of finding them a home, and I say seemingly because that isn't actually ever confirmed. And Gravik begins his scheme before he even knows that seeming truth. For all he and the Skrull radicals know at this point, things are just taking a while, and his response to this is a campaign to wipe out humanity. Gravik never works towards or even considers coexistence, the position held by his rival Talos. He doesn't want a place to live, he wants a place to own, and he wants it now. It is, of course, true that his actions become increasingly desperate, that he domineers, threatens, kills his subordinates for speaking out, but given the nature of his cause, again, what he's working toward is domination, Skrull autocracy, either elsewhere or on Earth. This isn't exactly a U-turn. We're not flag smasher moding. This isn't a bomb-throwing anarchist moment, it's a bomb-throwing terrorist moment. Gravik isn't a misunderstood luminary sabotaged by the script. He didn't really have a point in the same way those other examples did. He's bad. He's the bad guy. He's a villain. He's wrong. And that's okay. Lately it's become fashionable to do this, to make villains halfway reasonable, or at least to make them seem reasonable, and you know, that's fine, often it works. Killmonger tops a lot of best recent villain lists. Loki, also beloved, kinda fits that bill, albeit in a different way. Outside of Marvel, Kylo Ren was shaping up to be a great antagonist for the sadly unfinished two-part Star Wars sequel series, and films like Cruella, Maleficent, and hey, Joker display the dominance of this trend in recent years. But a good villain doesn't always need a reasonable point. Bad guys can work fine as good villains too. Indeed, they make up the majority of most best villain rankings. Gravik isn't with the Flag Smashers, he's here, with the Hans Grubers. Is it tone deaf, a bad look, maybe even outright insensitive to give this type of villain role to one of these displaced Skrulls, the subjects of this already precarious refugee metaphor? Well, it could have been, but for all Secret Invasion's problems, I don't think this is one of them, because Gravik is a bad guy, but crucially, that's not all he is. The last video I put out talks a little more about the integration moral at the heart of Secret Invasion. It's not super developed and it's not brilliantly executed, but after oscillating between Fury's ethno-statey, segregation-y, put all the Skrulls over there plan, and Gravik's kill all humans idea, Gaia, and spiritually the show itself, takes up Talos' torch and envisions a future of Skrull-human coexistence, of mutual cooperation and empathy without total assimilation. Conflict breeds trauma, trauma breeds conflict. Getting caught up in that cycle is easy. The hard thing is untying that knot. How do you do that? Well, Secret Invasion doesn't have that answer, but it does argue that the solution lays nearer Talos than Gravik, and maybe the best evidence for this is Gravik himself.
His parents were killed in the last stand against the Kree. He escaped from behind enemy lines, piloted a ship all on his own.
Sorry to hear about your parents.
They died a brilliant death.
I'm sure they did.
The first time we meet Gravik chronologically, Secret Invasion makes sure to impress the fact that the Skrulls aren't refugees in the abstract. Theirs is not a healthy society that simply happens to be without a home. It's a battered and bruised one. These are people with nothing, mourning their loved ones, their past lives, their past identities. When we meet Gravik, he's a refugee, an orphan, and is clearly not okay. Conflict breeds trauma. Fury uses him as a soldier, indoctrinates him into violence by promising a future home, and then goes full shocked Pikachu face when Gravik tries to unilaterally, genocidally make that trade 20 years later. Trauma breeds conflict. We have sympathy for Gravik, but not in the same way we have sympathy for someone like Carly. It's nearer the way we have sympathy for a Darth Vader. He's wrong, his actions are evil, but we can see how and why that wrongness emerged, and we can see that it didn't have to. Gravik wouldn't be down this road if his parents hadn't been killed by the Kree. He wouldn't be down this road if he weren't a refugee, and he probably wouldn't be down this road if Fury had pursued a plan like Talos's 20 years in the past, had reached some sort of agreement to let the Skrulls live with us, to let Gravik be a kid, not a killer. Gravik is a villain, but he's more than that. He's a failure. He's Fury's failure. He's the explosive result of a half-hearted, abandoned commitment to empathy, and to the humane and equal treatment of another culture. His villainy, his short fuse, his self-destructive drive toward domination isn't the writers avoiding the point, it is their point. So Gravik isn't really one of these, hey, he's kind of got a point, political caricature villains. He is, instead, a character reflecting the way hardline violent zealotry can emerge from disadvantage and suffering. Not because of any intrinsic violence in any culture, but because of conflict, because of the resultant trauma, and because needs are not being met. He's wrong, he's a danger, but that wrongness emerged because of the toll war and displacement had taken on his family and his people. Again, this is not Carly blowing up a building to tell the viewer that she's the bad guy now. There is no U-turn here. There's no blowing past the good point. There's just a bad dude with bad ideas who does bad things because of a bad situation and a bad world. Is that enough? Does that constitute a reasonable and sufficiently sensitive basis for a radical refugee villain, especially one laden with all the thematic baggage these Skrulls have at this point? Or is Gravik's villainy just another wholehearted Secret Invasion L? I don't think that's a question I can answer here, but I will make one last point. There is a rough analogue for the Carly role in that villain with a point template here. An idealist whose position seems too far, but whose death catalyzes the protagonist, or rather protagonists, to take that position up their way, and to get results. And that's Talos. I don't want to get too far into this, or the way it kind of flips that dynamic, we'd be here all day, but I will say that I think bringing the right answer forth from the Skrull camp as well as the wrong one goes quite a long way. So with all that in mind, there are my 2 points. Not only has the type of villain role Gravik fills been widely misidentified, there is also something effective to his character that hasn't widely been seen, something that does work, or at least that would work in a better put together show. I'm sure there's more to it than this, of course, so if you think I'm missing anything major, please do enlighten me in the comments, but that's pretty much it for my measured defense of Gravik. One other good thing about Gravik, actually, before we wrap up, he looks great. The Skrull CG here is pretty solid. I love the seamless transition effects we got to see a few times. These Skrulls know how to blend in, but blending in doesn't have to be a Skrull secret. See, like most of you, I had a wallet. A nice wallet, but a big bulky one. I'd keep it in my front pocket, but it always stuck out. Not so cool a look, that, and pretty obvious to any ne'er-do-wells. But kind of like Rhodey, I'm now a changed man, ever since this video's partner Exter sent me some of their goodies. See, Exter makes smart wallets. They're slick and futuristic, built around an aluminium card holder that fans your cards out at the press of a button, and protects them from RFID skimming. I've been using the Parliament wallet in Juniper Green, but they also sent me the pared down, no frills card holder model, which is just as neat. So forget your old, bulky, unsafe wallet, because I've partnered with Exter to give you an exclusive discount. Enjoy up to 25% off using my code PILLAR, or link down in the description, and get yourself one of these bad boys, because they blend in. They're more reasonably priced than the competition, and you'll get free shipping above £50, free returns for months, and a 12-month warranty on all products. Check out their reviews. There's so many stars you'd be forgiven for thinking you're Nick Fury staring into the depths of space. Okay, that's it. No more bad Secret Invasion jokes. But for real, check them out. This is cutting edge stuff. To close us out though, I'll just quickly beg all of you to hit that like button, and I'll say a big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters on screen now, especially Daniel Goldhorn, Karen Kuhlman, Magath, Ryan Emily, Something Capitalism Bad, Thomas R, and Weirdy Beardy. See ya.